1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi everyone! You won't believe this! I'm here! This is Jewish Talk coming to you from NASA Community College. College, College on 90.3 WHPC. We're also streaming on nccradio.org. This program is later archived on Spreaker.com. Guess what? This program is repeated on Sunday evenings at 11 p.m. So hi there, my name is Rabbi Perl. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This all depends on when you are listening or watching. Oi, Gewalt! You can see us right now on Facebook Live at my page, ANCHELLEPERL, Facebook.com, Anshel Perl. So hello on the radio, hello online, hello to the world. My friends, I have a lot to talk about today. It's amazing. You know, sometimes you just have to go with the punches. And today I'd like to share with you, you know, we're now in the Jewish calendar in what was known as the saddest period. It's called the 3 weeks. 3 weeks. It started last Tuesday and it concludes a couple of weeks on what is known as Tisha B'Av, the saddest day, the day when we commemorate the destructions and we relive the destructions of the temple, the first and the second temple. So, yes, it is a sad time, and not only do we reflect on the sadnesses of yesteryear, but also of current. Of course, what's on our mind, of course, is what happened in Israel. 12 children in a football field simply were destroyed, murdered in a terror attack. Our heart goes out to them, to their family, and to the land of Israel. So during this very sad time, I want to bring you back to a perspective. The temples that we're talking about goes back to the times of the Babylonians and the Romans. It was actually the 25th year of the Babylonian exile. And God shows a vision of the future temple to the prophet Ezekiel. Remember, this was after the destruction of the first temple. Yet the second temple was built only partially. When eventually it was partially built, it was based on a description in the book of Ezekiel. As this description was reserved for the third and final temple. So here we go. It's just after the destruction of the first temple, and this prophet, Ezekiel, gets a prophetic description of another temple, which would be mostly to be used for the third and final one. What happened? We haven't got to the second yet. So Medrash tells us that when God commanded Ezekiel to describe the dimensions of this temple to the Jewish people, he asked the obvious question, Master of the universe, why are you telling me to go and tell Israel how the temple looks? They're now exiled in the land of our enemies. Is there anything they can do about it? Let them be. When they return back from the exile, then I'll tell them. Listen to what God answered. It actually has an important instruction for us today as well. God says to the prophet, should the construction of my house be ignored because my children are in exile? The study of the design of this temple, as detailed in the Torah, can actually be equated to actual construction. And God continues, go and tell them to study the form of the holy temple. And as a reward for their study, their occupation with it, says God, I will consider it as if they are actually building the holy temple. It's based on this medrash that the Lubavitcher Rabbi strongly promoted and encouraged us to learn about the building of this temple, especially during the time of the year in which we mourn its destruction. Interesting, when we address someone sitting Shiva, the loss of a family member, we say, may you be comforted amongst the other mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Here is a private family mourning their loss, and we talk about Zion and Jerusalem. The answer, of course, is that every destruction, every negativity will one day be transformed into a beautiful, absolute rebuilding of everything and on every different level. And so even though we're now in a period of time of real sadness on many, many levels, nevertheless, specifically during this time, we learn, the Rebbe encouraged us to learn about this temple, especially during the time of the year when we mourn its destruction. And therefore, I thought it interesting to share with you. We all look forward to the coming of Mashiach, when there will be no more wars, no more famines, and no more destructions, and no more fighting, and all the anti-Semitism, and all the other things will disappear. I'm going to share with you an outline of some of the distinct characteristics of the third temple that we rebuilt with the coming of Mashiach. First of all, it'll be big. It'll be great again. The third temple will be many times larger than the previous two temples. Have you been to Israel? You've seen the Temple Mount. You've seen diagrams. You know what the area is on the top of the Temple Mount. And when it comes to the third temple, it is going to be bigger than the previous two. For example, the area set aside for the second temple complex, or what is known today as the Temple Mount, was 500 by 500 cubits. Figure out, each cubit being approximately 18.9 inches. In the third temple, are you ready, my friends? While the other temple was 500 by 500 cubits, the third temple will be 3,000 by 3,000 cubits. That means it'll be 36 times larger. Approximately 22,325,625 square feet, or approximately 513 acres. That's how big of a complex the third temple will occupy. Another important, interesting detail about this, that the basic division of the temple into different sections, such as the area called the Kodesh, the Holy, that's where the menorah was, an outer, there was another, a altar called of the burning of the incense, and the Lechem Aponim. They were on the area called the Kodesh. And in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holies of Holies, where we had the Ark, that will be the same as in the previous temples, the actual divisions. However, the section called the Ezras Noshim in the second temple, the area called the women's section, will have a very different layout in the third temple. Whereas in the second temple, this section was 135 square cubit area in front of the Azara. That was an outer area. There was an inner area where they had an outer altar and where the sacrifices were brought. So this section was 135 square cubits in front of this Azara. In the third temple, this area will now be 312 by 317 cubits and will completely surround, almost like a square, the Azara. So it'll be a little bit of a different configuration on these two outer areas, the women's section and the other area called the Azara. Another important detail: iron was not used in the building of the first two temples. The verse tells us the house, when it was in building, was built of stone, finished at the quarry, outside of the area. And there was neither hammer, nor axe, nor any tool of iron heard in the house while it was in building. Why? How come there was no iron used? Because iron is used in the fashioning of weapons, and that's used to shorten life. And of course, the purpose of the temple was to make peace between man and God, thereby lengthening one's life. Therefore, it would be improper to build a life-sustaining structure with a material that's the exact opposite. So no iron was used. However, the Rebbe explains at length that when Mashiach comes, when swords will be beaten into plowshares and iron will be used for the positive, this prohibition of using metal in the structure of the temple will no longer apply. Unbelievable. So the use of the iron in the third temple will not just be a symptom of peace that will reign, but is actually symbolic of the entire Messianic era in general. Furthermore, the Hebrew word for iron is barzel. If you don't trust me, speak to either Eitan Kolshevsky or Binyamin Levine, and they will tell you that the Hebrew word for iron is barzel. The Arizal explains that the word barzel is the acronym for the 4 wives of Jacob, for whom the Jewish nation is descended. So the word barzel, Beis, Resh, Zayin, Lamed, 4 letters, stand for Bilhah, Rachel, Zilpah, and Leah. What's the significance? Why would the word iron be barzel, and why would it reflect an acronym of the 4 wives of Jacob? This corresponds to the mystic's explanation that in the era of redemption, women will be higher on a higher level than men. So, gentlemen, you've heard it from me, straight from me. When Mashiach comes, the women will be higher on a much higher level than all of us put together. Another important detail of the third temple, what we learn is that we all know of the 3 pilgrimage holidays. So people in biblical times, in the temple times, would make the effort to travel to Jerusalem for Passover, for Shavuos, and for Sukkot. The Medrash explains that although during the first 2 temples we made this pilgrimage 3 times a year, when Mashiach comes, we will be doing this every first of each month. Every Rosh Chodesh will have the opportunity to come to the temple. The Medrash goes on to explain that this was impossible to do during the first 2 temples, but in the era of the third temple, we will have clouds, so to speak, miraculous, great transportation that will allow us to transport us to Jerusalem, to the temple, enabling us to visit the Holy Temple on a much more frequent basis. So let us share a bracha. May the merit of learning, as we are now, all of us are learning how the third temple will look with all of its fascinating details. May the merit of the learning about the building of the temple stand us in good stead. And, of course, may we merit the rebuilding of this third holy temple speedily in our days. I take a look at our Facebook. We'd like to say hello to Binyamin Levine, who is actually in Israel. Thank you for watching us, sharing with us. Good morning to Jeffrey Hirsch, Linda Zellickson, to Jane Batista, who is watching us in the Philippines. Special hello to all those out there in the Philippines, to Gina Marie, and to Eitan Kolshevsky. Please be very happy. I'm very happy to see you, and I please keep listening and let your friends know we're here every Sunday from 8 to 9 a.m. Let us continue now in our conversation today, and I want to share the following. We often hear the word ledor v'dor, from generation to generation. It's used in prayer. It's spoken in families. It speaks of passing from generation to generation within Jewish life. And this expression of continuity suggests that a smooth transition from one generation to the next is the only one Hebrew. It's dor v'dor, passing on the baton from generation to generation. We want to say that so many people are watching us all around the world, and we also have those in the car driving. Our good friend Zalman Stewart Wegg is on the way to his important mission, and he's happy to tell us he's only 460 miles to go. Well, drive safely, and all of us here in Radio Land and Facebook Live world wishes you a wonderful trip, and we look forward to your return. But anyone who studies or practices leadership knows that succession is tricky. Sometimes it's even treacherous. veteran leaders may hesitate to hand over the reins, believing that they have the most wisdom and experience. Experience alone does not create trust. Experience can also be a liability. This succession from older to younger leaders raises deep anxieties about an organization's identity and how it's governed. You see, new policies can alienate traditional supporters. Such turns can also destabilize a political party or an organization for months, if not longer. Yet implementing change is critical and essential. It signals to the stakeholders that new energy and ideas are valued. Emerging talent will be nurtured and grown. Leadership transitions, obviously, you can all appreciate, has been the center of U.S. politics this week, as President Joe Biden decided to end his re-election run and throw his support behind the vice president. What I find fascinating, and the reason why I'm sharing this with you, is because all of us attending the synagogue this weekend on Shabbos found that in the portion of Pinchas, this very issue is discussed. And we find numerous examples of the next generation leadership, because what do we read? We read that one of the last requests Moses made is that he ceded. He knew his role as the leader of the Israelites was now closing in. He knew his time was up. He was being told that go up on the mountain and you're going to conclude this world just like your brother Aaron. You're not going to the Holy Land. And immediately, right in this very week that the whole United States is talking about, passing on the baton, we see Moses in the Torah portion guiding us and immediately saying it's important for me to pass on and provide for the next generation of leaders. These examples are followed by these questions and by his knowledge that he knows that he must transfer the power because so much is at stake. The exact words are, "Let Hashem, the source of breath, appoint someone over the community who shall go out before them and come in before them, and who shall take them out and bring them in." Because the community, Hashem's community, may not be like sheep that have no shepherd. And guess what? This week, as we read this section of the Torah, God immediately grants Moses' request. And guess who becomes the next leader? Joshua. Joshua is chosen. Moses' own sons are not deemed worthy. We discussed it at great length at our synagogue this weekend, and why Moses' sons were not worthy of taking over the business, so to speak. And because the most important thing was the needs of the nation that comes first. Joshua, the student of Moses, earns his place through loyalty and hard work. And according to interpretations in the Jewish tradition, he deserved this new status. Why? Because he straightened out the chairs in the study hall and carried buckets of water. Come on, is that what we are looking for in a leader? Well, of course, there was more to it, but why is that included? Because true leaders are determined ultimately about serving rather than being served. So a key attribute of Joshua, of why he was given this position, is because he cared for others. Hello? Cared for others, not his own agenda. And we see the actual passing of the baton. Moses lays his hands upon Joshua's head in a gesture of affection and authority, and secures his replacement in front of the entire congregation publicly. It wasn't behind the scenes. It wasn't in the back room somewhere. The entire world at that time stood there and watched the passing on of the leadership from Moses to Joshua. As the sentence says, the Torah tells us, invest him with some of your authority so that the whole Israelite community will follow. This biblical equivalent of an endorsement told others that Joshua had God's approval rating. Wow. As we live longer and healthier lives, many deserving leaders wait in the wings for established leaders to cede power. They rarely go willingly, as we've seen with many political and corporate leaders today. They hang on too long and make little room for fresh blood when they should have left the world stage gracefully. When they do, as we've seen this past week, right, we praise the person for that wisdom. They create space for praise and appreciation, and the service is feted. The transfer of power takes place, think about this, within families, within companies, within for-profit and non-profit structures. Our own Jewish organizations, schools, synagogues, communal institutions would benefit from taking a page out of Moses' playbook. How old are those who are leading? Who is waiting to lead, and for how long? I share with you the words from Bill George, which is Dr. Kolshevsky's good friend. He wrote an article in Harvard Business Review. It was called The CEO's Guide to Retirement. The self-worth of a leader, he writes, is profoundly connected to his or her public self-image. It is understandable to want to stay in the game and remain relevant and vital, but it is not fair to put personal concerns above the well-being of an organization. So what is Bill George's advice? Finish strong. Leave before you are asked to leave. Prepare a year earlier by charting a new chapter. Make a clean break to give space for successes to grow. Create a pause of 6 to 12 months before taking on new leadership commitments to recover rather than rebound. Interesting, when we talk about Moses, in this very week, the Bible's telling us about how he passed on and got God's approval rating, high amount, and all the polls said this was the greatest thing, that Joshua was taking over. Moses' death is discussed later on, and his lasting contribution is really outlined there. Never again did arise in Israel a prophet like Moses. Interesting, the entire Torah ends not with Israel's arrival in Canaan, but a discussion of Moses' legacy. Moses leaves only after anointing his successor, his decades of service a crowning achievement. So you see, the story of every nation is the story of its leaders. When they are born, how they lived, and also how they leaved, and how they left it on for the next generation. Many people ask the question, why do we need to have a temple? My friends, when people go to see a doctor, their hope is that doctor will find a remedy for the problem. That's what a doctor's all about. The doctor's not there to tell them when they're going to die, but to do everything they can to make a difference in that person's life. Give them hope, give them the ability, to give them the guidance to hopefully overcome the illness that they are facing, or whatever it may be. We have so many problems today, but it takes people with vision, not short-sightedness, to understand how to overcome the problem today. As I mentioned last week, how this funny story about a person, a reporter came to a psychiatric hospital, and he asked the administrator there, how do you determine someone should belong in a psychiatric hospital? He says, we give them a test. What's the test? We fill up a bath of water, and we give the guy a bucket, a cup, and a spoon. And we say to this, whoever it is, empty the water. So the reporter said, oh, simple. I guess the person who says I'm going to use the bucket or uses the bucket, that's a sign that he's a healthy person. He's using the bucket. He's not using the cup or the spoon. And the director says to him, no, a healthy person would pull the plug and let the water out. Sir, he says to this journalist, which room would you like to have? You can look out to the right or to the left. The point of this little story is everybody's looking at the world situation today with either a bucket or a teaspoon or a little cup. We must look for the big solution, to pull the plug on all the problems that we have today, all the problems that Israel faces from its enemies surrounding it. And most of us answer with a bucket, with a teaspoon. What I'm saying is, I'm saying this with respect, we look for small time reactions, short-term solutions. We need the big solution, the overarching, a completely transformation when the entire world will recognize its role, how it's complemented each country with each other, and the important role that Israel will play, and most importantly, to bring holiness to the world. Holiness to the world. And when everybody is working on the same, you're going to have a total transformation of all the problems. So when we go to see a doctor, he doesn't talk about the weather. He tries to help the person overcome everything and clean out the disease. That's the solution we want. Not small-time buckets, a little bit here, a little bit there, peace talk here, peace talk there. And there's something else I'd like to share with you as well. I share this with our congregation this Shabbos. The extraordinary importance of what Bibi Netanyahu spoke in Congress this week. And I make it clear to you, my friends, that I never talk in terms of political stuff. That's not what this program's all about. But I want to share with you an insight of how to look at that speech, not with a bucket, not with a spoon, and not with a little teaspoon or a little cup, but to have a bigger view, to live with a bigger vision, to understand the significance of what was going on when Bibi was speaking. Let me share with you. I bring you, right now, we all know in Paris, there's the Olympics. And the world will be turning its eyes, or has already started, with stadiums and arenas. And everybody, I even know we have members of our shul who are actually traveling this week to Paris, eagerly anticipating the formidable contests of strength, of speed, and all the other athletics that go on over there. However, halfway across the globe, we had different types of headlines that captured the newspapers across the world, which continues on sadly, as was brought to our attention, the battle for public opinion during Israel's war for survival. So earlier this week, Prime Minister Netanyahu descended into the halls of the U.S. Congress with his highly anticipated speech. And as you may know, if you listen to the actual speech itself, not the twisted turns and, by the pundits afterwards, but if you listened to it carefully, you would see what he said. It was highly anticipated. It received roaring applause from within. At the same time, the unruly protests that were taking place outside. Now, during this hour-long presentation, Bibi described how Israel is besieged on all sides by the Iranian-funded proxies, the Hamas from the southwest, the Hezbollah and other Syrian terror groups from the north, and the Houthis from the southeast. And there was an interesting question that came up with people who are open-minded, but not that open-minded to have lost their brains. The question was, How could the prime minister, what was the purpose of the prime minister leaving Israel at a time when the country needs him most? The prime minister is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. The IDF needs him there on the ground. In fact, you may know that what happened on Shabbos when, sadly, children were destroyed by terrorists in the Golan Heights, Bibi ran back. He came back. He was supposed to leave after Shabbos, but he went specifically because he was needed. And the question was, interesting question, what was the role? How important was it for him to come and make this speech? I want to share with you what I shared with our beautiful congregation, the congregation where Dorothy Rothstein is a wonderful member. We have a Talmudical passage that discusses of the obligation we all have to speak out against injustice at a place no less than an ancient sporting ritual. I'm sure many of you have traveled to Rome and seen the Roman Colosseums. What went on in those Colosseums? Captives were forced to fight towering, ravenous beasts in front of thousands of cheering spectators. This event was brought up in the Talmud on page 18b in the tractate Avodah Zarah, where the contemporary rabbis of the time debate whether it's appropriate for a Jewish person to attend one of those barbaric gladiators, spectators, as a spectator. Were you allowed to attend such an event? The rabbis discussed this. So in the tractate Avodah Zarah, page 18, one group of rabbis decrees it's forbidden. Why would it be forbidden to enter a stadium for such an event? Because by being there, you are becoming an accessory to murder. So the Jews' patronage is supporting the bloodshed of an innocent person. But guess what? Rabbi Nosson, one of the rabbis, he says you have to absolutely go. You have to go to the stadium, stand there, because as things went on in the Gladiator, this was the rules. I read that if things were getting tough and it was at a point where the ravenous animals could actually devour and destroy the gladiator, he was allowed to turn to the audience and ask, please, are you with me or are you not with me? And if the public said, we're not with you, nothing would be done, and that person would be at the mercy of the animals. But if the people around would say, no, save him, then of course, wherever the officials would do everything to get rid of the animal. So, in this case, says the Talmud, as sadly as was in that time, invariably, there was a Jewish guy who was a gladiator. He'd been forced to be put in that position. Says this Rabbi Nosson, you are allowed to go to the stadium, even if the majority are screaming, kill him, but you have the obligation, to be able to be there, and even if you're a silent, I should say a single voice, but you're a voice of moral dissenter, you must go there and shout and shout and shout and say, this is not fair, this is not fair. And he states that through his ardent shouts and pleading of one moral dissenter, the condemned might be able to be rescued. So think about this. So picture the scene. A lone and righteous Jew standing in the bleachers amid those drunken throngs, callously carried away by their unrestrained lust for gore. And when the time comes to vote on the gladiator's fate, all the thumbs are pointed down, condemning the peasant to death. Except for this rabbi. This Rabbi Nosson, his thumb goes up, pointing up to heaven. He urged that individual, to go to the stadium for the chance of being able to help and save that person's life. Might his small act of protest really make a difference in a sea of lies? Perhaps. But the important thing for Rabbi Nosson is that the voice of truth has an advocate present. You see, I share this with you. This opinion is one which has great application to the events of today. Israel's position on the world stage is analogous to the poor gladiator's dilemma thousands of years ago. God forbid, sentenced to death by corrupt officials, the gladiator's only recourse was the feeble court of public opinion. Sadly, aside from the US, the world votes down Israel at every turn and condemns its very right to defend itself. We've heard about the ICC issuing arrest warrants for Netanyahu, and others. The ICJ has called Israel an illegal occupying entity. So amid all of this sea of global excoriation, here comes Bibi. He is like this lone dissenter advocating for Israel's right to exist. The Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memories taught a similar lesson. The Rebbe, whose 30th yahrzeit was observed this year, offered guidance and advice to many of Israel's political, military and social leaders, including Prime Minister Netanyahu. I was in the audience at 770 Eastern Parkway when Prime Minister, then he was the ambassador to the UN, came on Simchas Torah and spoke with the Rebbe for 45 minutes. Thousands of people are there waiting to celebrate, to continue the Hakafas, the celebration of the day. And on Simchas Torah, how interesting, October the 7th, Simchas Torah in Israel. But during that 45 minutes, the Rebbe spoke to him. Bibi met the Rebbe on so many occasions during his political career, most famously when he was appointed Israel's ambassador to the UN. And I was there that year in the audience. And the Rebbe told him then, which of course Bibi has shared many times, the Rebbe said to him, "You will go into a house of lies, but remember that in a hall of perfect darkness, if you light one small candle, its precious light will be seen from afar by everyone. Your mission is to light a candle for truth and for the Jewish people. When justice fails us, all we have is the power of our voice. If we have the platform to speak out, we must do so. We must be even if we must be the lone voice of truth in a hall full of lies. But we also have the ability, you and me, to be beacons of light and dispel much darkness. Our actions, no matter how small they may be, have the power to make a significant impact. In addition to contacting our representatives in government and expressing our point of view on social media, we can also light Shabbos candles, give tzedakah, wrap tefillin, and perform other mitzvahs which brings a positive and spiritual light into this world. So I urge myself, I urge you, let us do our part in illuminating the world. Through our collective efforts, we can create a world where kindness and goodness prevail. In doing so, we embody the teachings of the great rabbi in the Talmud that I mentioned, Rabbi Nosson, and the Rebbe's perspective, individuals who dedicated their lives to spreading light and the truth to all of humanity. Let us carry forward this mission, transforming our world into a place where true justice and righteousness thrives. All of this will be realized in the fullest measure with the rebuilding of the third temple. That's how important it is. Each of us has the ability to be the lone voice of reason, no matter how loud the anti-Semites and the Israeli bashers may be. The power of one person's voice, when it is pointing others towards light, is immeasurable. This is a time for each of us to shout the truth from the rooftops. And indeed, leaving all the politics aside, all the stuff from this side and that side, that's exactly what Bibi Netanyahu was doing in Congress this past week. Shouting the truth from the rooftops. One of the things that occupy our minds, especially in these days, is we should know we're not alone. And I want to share with you an interesting episode in the life that takes us back to 1970. This was an Israeli fighter pilot, Menachem Eini, who was returning from a mission when his plane was hit by an Egyptian anti-aircraft missile. He was just 15 seconds away from the border, but with his plane about to crash, he was forced to parachute into hostile Egyptian territory. Badly injured on landing, Menachem Eini saw the smoke of his ravaged plane, but found no sign of his co-pilot. In the distance, he saw a truck full of Egyptian soldiers coming his way. He feared his end was near. The soldiers searched him, sedated him, and took him into captivity. After some time in a hospital, he was placed in a cramped cell with 9 other Israeli captives. For 3 years long, they lived together, hidden from the sun. On a few occasions, they were allowed to leave their cell. They were blindfolded, isolated from their family and friends, cut off from the entire outside world. The prisoners had no idea when or if their captivity would end. But finally, in 1974, approximately 4 years later, after the Yom Kippur War, a prisoner exchange was brokered and the captives were released. Some time after arriving home and reuniting with his wife and daughters, and may that happen very speedily with all the hostages today, Menachem Eini, after coming home, he accepted the Air Force's offer to return to the base in a non-combat role. Eini later recalls, "Outwardly, I was productive and energetic. In fact, I was held up as a model of recovery and resilience. But he shared with us, inside, I was hiding a terrible inner fatigue. I would look around and see people at ease with themselves, while I felt profoundly restless. Any noise would irritate me. Even music became intolerable clamor. I could find no peace." A friend of his recognized this. He saw that everything wasn't right with him and advised him to go to visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe. In the Rebbe's study, for the first time since his release a few months earlier, this Menachem Eini unburdened himself. He recounted that the memories were very painful as he spoke to the Rebbe. And I think people who've gone through a traumatic experience often prefer to suppress the trauma as much as possible. Yet here, I was recounting these memories without feeling a drop of pain or shame. If there was anything, of course, to be ashamed of course not. He's sitting now with the Rebbe. As Eini exposed his months and years of trauma, the loss of his co-pilot, his fear of imminent death, the never-ending interrogations, the years in captivity, the shock of freedom, the anxious anticipation, the surreal reunion, the visits with family or friends who didn't survive, the Rebbe gently coaxed him to share more, encouraged him to keep on talking. He was absolutely and totally present. Menachem speaks of the Rebbe, allowing him to share his burdens. I felt he became my consciousness. I was speaking to him, but also to myself. I was bringing things to the surface from inside that I would never otherwise tell anyone else or even myself. His listening the way he did helped me heal from the experiences of captivity. I even had my first healthy laugh. I discovered that a person can be addressed fully through silence and listening alone. Menachem continues, Menachem Einai. I needed this meeting like oxygen. When I left, I felt more reflective, more connected to myself. I was able to revisit my time in captivity and to begin to relate to it without fear. I felt like a stone had rolled off my chest. Anybody knows the history? This individual, Menachem Einai, went on to spearhead the multi-billion-dollar project to develop the Lavi, a fighter jet for Israel's Air Force. But before concluding their meeting, the Rebbe advised Einai to write a memoir of his time in captivity. Unfortunately, the Rebbe explained, you will probably not be Israel's last prisoner of war, and others who will be taken captive will benefit from reading about your experience. So Menachem Einai recounted a particularly poignant moment in this fateful meeting he had with the Rebbe. I told the Rebbe that one of my challenges while in captivity was the pressure from the incessant togetherness. Even as I engaged in personal work like drawing or writing poetry or journaling, I knew I wasn't alone and others could always look at what I was doing. It was always crowded in the room, he said, being together all the time without even a minute to myself. After a moment of silence, the Rebbe remarked, and yet, despite the togetherness, everyone was left with their own loneliness. These were the words of the Rebbe. Despite the togetherness, everyone was left with their own loneliness. Menachem said, I looked up at the Rebbe for a moment and thought, how does he know that? But I knew he was right. And I realized that he had insight in how a person would overcome this universal loneliness. Today, many, many years later, Menachem continues, I sometimes think that the Rebbe would want me to find this path too. On a very elemental level, when we think of loneliness, we think of the absence of human interaction, the craving we feel to be with others when we're all alone. However, as Einai experienced, feeling lonely can mean something deeper than simply wanting to be with other humans. Even when surrounded with many friends, it is possible to feel alone on life's journey, that no one is really with us. There's no one who truly knows and pays attention to what's going on inside our hearts. Despite the best intentions of the people we spend time with, we might still feel like we carry the burden of life entirely on our own. When studying the Rebbe's letters, it appears that addressing this core human loneliness sat at the center of the Rebbe's advice and counsel. He sought to provide an antidote to sadness, the emptiness, the sheer utter aloneness that so many endure. He believed that filling this void was critical to becoming a healthy human being. I share with you what the Rebbe wrote to a teenage boy. He said the following, to feel not alone in life, with only you on one side and the entire world on the other, it is the most important thing of all. A person's entire sense of fulfillment and contentment is dependent on it. And that is not to feel alone in life. When the Rebbe assumed leadership in 1950, the world was still reeling from the devastation of the Second World War and the atrocities of the Holocaust. People were displaced and broken, and many were struggling to find their place, literally and figuratively, in a world that had treated them so brutally. People were thoroughly alone. A letter from 1951 addresses a couple who survived the war, and it describes this: the tremendous upheavals of our generation, which shattered various spiritual foundations and tore many away from the deeply rooted traditions, both familial and national, have caused many people to feel that they're suspended in midair. They go about their days thinking they are alone, and each one draws conclusions from these lonely thoughts in accordance to their own individual natures and personalities. Though the world we live in today is far removed from the traumas of the first half of the 20th century, these words still seem to accurately depict the experience of so many people. Despite living in an age of around-the-clock connection, people feel increasingly isolated. Clearly, we are yearning for something more than simply to be with others, physically or digitally. It appears that ultimately, despite the togetherness, everyone is left with their own loneliness. So, what can allow us to fulfill this gnawing void? How can we overcome this? My friends, there are various approaches, from the soberly, from practical to the very profound existential. For those who think deeply into their personal world, the only way to counter the sense of being alone, like I said earlier, only you on one side and the entire world on the other side kind of feeling, the Rabbi says, you know how you counter that? Is with the awareness of the Creator and the Conductor of the world, who is ever present in this world, even today, in our life. Let's unpack this as much time as we have to be able to share this with you. What does this mean? There's so many different opinions, whether God made the world and went down to Florida and lets it run by itself, or God just takes care of the big things and the small things left. In Hasidic thinking, it's totally different. Far from God just abandoning the world and just things running by itself, God is intimately involved in the world. He is always present at the side of every individual, no matter their spiritual level or place in society, and all occurrences in their lives are intrinsically important to Hashem. So here are the two Hasidic principles that I share with you. First, God is directly involved even in the smallest details of our lives. And number two, as the Rebbe once said to a young man, God is your friend. God is not out to get us. He is the essence of goodness and kindness and always looks out for our best interests. If a person reflects on these two ideas honestly, with an open mind, but not that the brains have fallen out, it can help us replace our fears of being alone in a brutal world with the serenity of being in the company and the care of God, whose greatness surpasses every challenge and whose kindness is total and unwavering. Unlike many human relationships that falter and sometimes fail, often leaving us feeling very alone, let us remember God's presence and interests are constant in every one of us. He has no external reasons for being in your life. It is you, each of us, that Hashem is interested in. May Hashem bless us all with good news all around the world for everybody. Have a wonderful week. Shalom and Am Yisrael Chai.